All right, our lesson one, agency relationships chapter is we're going to finish the lecture part up with our key concept review. Our first concept is this idea of what agency is, and I think we covered this pretty thoroughly as we went through this. Again, the big deal with agency is that we have a real estate agent who represents a principal. And when that happens, that's when this fiduciary relationship is formed. And so it's really important to know if you are or aren't someone's agent and they are or aren't your client. If you work with people as a customer, there's no agency relationship there. But if you are an agent of a principal, you owe them those fiduciary duties we've talked about and can be held accountable to them if you violate any of those, which could be loss of commission and in fact even loss of license. As far as real estate licensees, be careful about using the term client when you're talking to your customer because they might think you're representing them and then you may not be giving them those client duties that they're going to expect because you've established an implied agency by your words or your actions. So always watch your words, always watch your actions so you know the difference of how you're acting between a client and a customer. Again, we talked about old card. That's a good way to remember your fiduciary duties to your client. There are various types of agents. Now, we just want to talk about the general agent, and then below that, the special agent. In Illinois, we have general agents, which are generally property managers, a good example of that. And then we have special agents, which is what you're going to be, because again, you only do one special or specific activity. You market property. Those general agents are doing a lot more activities for their clients. With designated agency, again, that's important in Illinois because in Illinois, our agency law in Illinois allows me, as your sponsoring designated, if you will, managing broker, I can designate agency from you to a client. I can make you a designated agent. And that's important because by designating you as an agent of a seller, and maybe somebody else in our office, I designate them the agent of a particular buyer. That means I'm never a dual agent. I don't get involved with agency in any way, shape, or form. So that's actually a protection to me and to my office. Again, dual agency, yes, we can in our real estate business represent both parties, the seller and the buyer, let's say, or landlord and tenant as well, as a dual agent. Just remember, if you're going to be a dual agent, first of all, we have to give them informed written consent. They have to give us, I should say, they have to be informed by us, and then they have to give us written consent to proceed as a dual agent. And of course, that needs to all be in writing, as we said, informed written consent. And if both parties agree to it, then we can represent them. Typically in the residential business, we don't have a lot of dual agency in the residential brokerage business, but in the commercial business, there's a lot more dual agency for a bunch of reasons I won't get involved in right now. But there's more dual agency in the commercial field than there is in residential. Vicarious liability, we talked about that. Can't be held liable if you weren't aware of the other party's actions. Any liability won't accrue to you. We talked about the multiple listing services and their importance in the brokerage industry, both commercial as well as residential brokerage industry. But by putting property, MLSs don't enter into the transaction. So they're never an agent or, if you will, sub-agent of agents. That's what a sub-agent is. It's an agent of an agent. They don't become an agent of you just because we put our property in the local MLS. If we're going to terminate our agency relationship, let's say we have a listing contract, and let's say we want it, the seller and/or we want to terminate it before the time. How can we terminate it? Well, a couple of ways that these agency contracts, these employment contracts, are terminated, at least legally. Okay. First of all, we accomplish the purpose. After we've sold the property at closing, that listing contract terminates. We're no longer anybody's client after closing. Or the expiration of the time period. Let's say we have a listing for 90 days. At the end of 90 days, it terminates. Now, it doesn't mean we can't renew it, but that's, if you will, a new contract. It doesn't automatically extend itself. And then there are some other ways to do it. Operation of law would mean if we had a listing contract and let's say the property was taken by eminent domain, that would terminate the listing contract by operation of law. And a couple of others that we'll talk about when we talk about contracts in another lesson. We'll get into mutual agreement, renunciation, revocation, and what the difference is there. I think that's lesson 3. And so these are the various duties that we owe our clients. This is what we talked about, these minimum services. Maybe I should even put this in the next slide, minimum services clause. This is what we owe our clients when we start working with sellers and with buyers as well when it's appropriate. Okay, we seek their best interests. We seek a contract that's acceptable for them. We work in a timely fashion. We disclose material facts. We're loyal. We give reasonable skill, confidentiality when we have a client working with. Our duties to customers are not as broad as our duties to our clients, but we still have to be fair and honest. We have to disclose material facts to them as well. So we can't cheat somebody just because they're our customer and not our client. Fraud we talked about. Now the big deal about fraud is that what if we make statements that are maybe outlandish? You know, salespeople are always talking of properties. That's what they do. And so salesman statements that aren't intended to deceive or intentionally misrepresent the property are okay. And by that I mean this would be marketing talk. This is sales talk. Courts allow that. So if you're telling, these are puffery statements, okay? And puffery statements are not intended to be taken as absolute truth. Most people can know the difference. So if I say to you as a buyer, this is the best property in town, I'm just sure of it. I've seen a bunch of properties. This is a cupcake. This one is. That's puffery. If something goes wrong with the property after Mr. Buyer purchases the property, they can come back and say, oh, you defrauded me. So puffing or puffery are statements that build the property's benefits up, but they should not be taken so seriously. Okay? So those are permissible. Fraudulent statements, not permissible. Also, the written disclosure at first substantive contact. So again, for the state of Illinois, and I'm not sure this happens every day in the real estate business in real life, but for the state exam, when you first have your first substantive meeting with a consumer, they walk in your office, okay, that would be a substantive meeting. You have to have a discussion on agency, what it is and what it isn't. And if they agree to it, you get them under a contract, buyer brokerage agreement or a listing agreement. If they want to be a customer, then you get them under a non-agency. And just so you know, sellers are never customers. So primarily we're talking about tenants and we're talking about buyers. That could be your customers. Your sellers are never your customer. They're always your client. Ministerial acts, we'll talk about that later. The big thing that I want to point out is this idea of 5 years. Okay, let me try to do that. How did I do there? Not too bad. 5 years. Okay, most records in Illinois have to be held for a minimum of 5 years. And we'll talk about this more. When you went through the license law chapter in chapter 14, you probably saw a number of time periods in there, like how long you hold escrow accounts, how long you must keep records. Okay, it's 5 years. So when in doubt, you hold real estate records for a minimum of 5 years. The after initial relationship is formed, if that relationship might change from a customer to a client, and what they're saying, and this typically doesn't happen a lot, but if it does happen, just remember to make the necessary disclosure and make sure that you have either the listing or buyer brokerage contract that you might be going to in writing. Typically, you might have a buyer you start working with as a customer, and then later they want a more formal relationship, so they would go from customer to a client. And to do that, you would go from the notice of non-agency, which made them a customer, to a buyer brokerage agreement, which would then make them your client. Just make sure you do all the paperwork if your relationships change. We have a number of disclosures that have to be made to our clients, our sellers, or our buyers. We have to let them know about any compensation, where it's coming from. That'll be on the listing agreement. Okay, we have to tell our sellers how we're going to get paid and how that's going to happen and what we're going to do for them. If there's contemporaneous offers, obviously we have to disclose that. Latent property defects, we have to disclose that. Okay. Don't forget with sellers, they have to provide a property condition report, which, for lack of a better reason, is that real property seller disclosure form. Don't forget that. And that's what that's for, to give the disclosure of any property defects. So in Illinois, residential sellers must prepare and deliver to potential buyers a real property disclosure report that goes over about 23 different defects that may or may not be occurring on the property. We've got radon disclosure, and then we also have lead paint disclosure. So there's a number of disclosures that we as real estate agents have to be aware of to protect our sellers and our buyers. Antitrust laws, we talked about those. And of course, number 18 even talks about the price fixing. And basically, what 18 is saying is, do not ever discuss commissions to any competing real estate firm. That applies to you as brokers in my office, and that certainly applies to me in talking with other offices. Okay, but number one scary rule, if you will. Never discuss commissions. Only within your office to people that work in our office or to me, your managing broker. Okay, so continue on to the next step that you've got on part of your agenda for lesson 1, and there'll be a link there, and you'll click that link, and that will take you to your lesson quiz.